There are so many good cameras out there right now. It's kind of ridiculous. I don't think we've ever had a moment like this in history where there's just so many different cameras out there from all kinds of brands that are just pretty much doing everything that you could ever want it to do. So in this video, I want to go over if the Canon R6 is still a good option in the age of endless cameras, aka 2021. Since all these new cameras have come out, I feel as though the R6 has kind of been forgotten about. I'm like one of the few channels that really talks about the R6 still because I mean, it's my main camera, so of course I'm gonna talk about it, but you don't see a lot of talk about it anymore, especially with all these new Sony cameras coming out. I think one of the major reasons the R6 isn't really talked about as much as other cameras is because it's missing one key feature that most of all these new cameras actually have. And that's 120 frames per second in 4K. You look at the Sony a7S III, it has 4K 120, the R5 4K 120, and a lot of these new cameras still have 4K 120, while the R6 only goes 4K 60. It does have 120 frames per second, but it only goes up to 1080p, and it has autofocus and all that. So you could get 120 frames per second and some pretty nice quality 120 frames per second, but it's still not that 4K option. So that may be turning a lot of people off, especially if 120 frames per second is like a big deal for you. But if we think about it, the R6 is actually one of the cheapest camera options that is to come out of this new wave of all these new cameras coming out. So the R6 missing that feature, yeah, it's kind of justifiable. Is that a word, justifiable? You can kind of justify it because it's on the lower end of these new high-end cameras that are coming out, if that makes sense. So it does make sense that it would be missing maybe a little bit of these new key features that are in all these new cameras. However, the R6 still packs a really big punch. For the price of this camera, you're getting full frame 4K, 4K up to 60 frames per second, 1080p at 120 frames per second. You're getting 4:2 10-bit codec, you're getting C-Log, and so on. You're getting most of the new features that you would expect in one of these higher end cameras. So for the price of this camera, I mean, you're getting a lot of amazing capabilities and a lot of features. Sadly, it's just being kind of overshadowed by all these crazy 8K specs and 4K 120 and all that. This is the kind of specs that a lot of people wanted a while ago. So it's still a phenomenal camera. That being said, I wish it did have 120 frames per second at 4K because I'd be more likely to use 120 frames per second if I had that option because I shoot most of my stuff in 4K. That being said, the 1080p does look good and I can mesh it with the 4K and you would hardly notice, especially on YouTube's compression. So, especially if you upscale that, it looks good. Another fantastic thing about the R6 is it's a lot easier for beginners to hop into it because you got that little top dial where you can switch between video, shutter priority, photo, and all of that. Where in the R5 or cameras like that, you kind of have to go into a menu and choose, I don't know, you got to go through the menu and find photo and video, and yeah, it's a little bit more complicated. So this is a little bit more user-friendly, especially for those beginners out there who just want to get right into it. The 4K on this camera is chef's kiss. It's 5K downsampled, so it makes the 4K just extremely sharp. It looks fantastic. There's not much more to say about it. It's really sharp 4K. It looks really, really good. It also takes phenomenal photos. A lot of people are weird about the whole 20 megapixels in this camera, but I don't know if we've all forgotten that the 1DX Mark II and Mark III is the same thing. It has 20 megapixels and those cameras are known for taking phenomenal photos. So you don't need these crazy 45, 50 megapixel cameras to get tack sharp photos. You're gonna get some amazing photos out of this camera, trust me. What makes this camera really good for YouTube is it does take phenomenal video and it takes phenomenal photos. So it's good for your content creating. So if you wanna, make a thumbnail for your video, you can use the same camera that you make the actual video with. So it's a lot nicer than having, a camera for video and a camera for photo and just having all this clutter. You can just have it all in one little package and it works great. How many times have I said phenomenal? I believe since this camera does have 20 megapixels, it actually makes it a better low light camera. I believe you get at least one more stop of light in the R6 than you would the R5 because of the lower megapixels. So if you're trying to get some really nice low light shots with a Canon camera, I think the R6 is probably your best low light performing camera at the moment. I made a video on the low light performance on the R6 and it's with an f4 lens, so you should check that out. It looks really good. What side does it pop up on? One of these sides. It's a great video. Like it, subscribe, and yeah. If you're not looking for the crazy 8K features or 4K 120, I can highly recommend the R6 because it's just so phenomenal. The picture on it looks amazing. Plus you get all those features that I mentioned. Plus it's one of the cheapest cameras out there out of this new wave of crazy cameras that are out there. And if you go with the R6 over all these new cameras, you're saving a bit of money that you can invest into something like a lens or lights, things like that that are actually gonna really improve the quality of your videos or photos. I leave that out a lot. I'm mainly a video shooter, so video is mainly on my mind, but it's the same thing for photos. With all that being said, I don't work for Canon. I'm not trying to sell you this camera. This camera may possibly not be the right camera for you, and that's okay. So is the R6 a good option for 2021? And I would say absolutely. It's a phenomenal camera. There you go, saying phenomenal again. Got a lot of phenomenal stuff going on in my head right now. This camera will do the job and it will do it well, especially if you're not looking for those high-end crazy features, which probably in another year, cameras in this price range will probably have, and then these higher end cameras will probably have 42K or something in it, and yeah, just be kind of ridiculous. But anyways, nowadays you can get pretty much any camera and it's gonna do the job. It's gonna look great. If you're looking to move into the full frame system and don't have quite the budget for the R6, you can go for something like the RP or the R or whatever Sony has to offer. I'm not familiar with Sony as much as I am Canon, so yeah, that's why I talk about Canon mostly. At the end of the day,
you can do whatever the fuck you wanna do.